Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Understanding Our Founders' Constitution. Each time of this week, we normally take some aspect of our Constitution and talk about how it relates to current events and things we see going on in our country. But tonight, I want to take a little bit of a different tact. And that is, I want to take a look at what it is that made our Constitution even possible, what makes our society possible, and contrast that with what we see going on in our world today. You know, back when President George Bush launched the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, the goal was to bring democracy to these Muslim countries in the Middle East. A noble goal, I will grant, but it is a goal that we can see that has fallen far short, and it is a goal which I contend will never be realized. And it is foolish to think otherwise and to attempt to bring it about. The very basic reason is that the very basis and the philosophy of Islam, which I consider to be a fascist ideology which masquerades under the cloak of a religion, is 100% diametrically opposed to the very tenets of democracy, republican form of government, freedoms and liberties that we just take for granted here in the United States and other parts of the Western world. And because of the philosophy of Islam, we are going to be under assault, and we are under assault, because their intent is to conquer us one way or the other, and to make us Muslim, compliant to Sharia law, instead of them becoming democratized and experiencing the freedoms and the liberties that we feel are inalienable rights given to us by our Creator. So let's take some time this evening just to look at what it is the very basis of our society and our Constitution, and how does that contrast with the tenets of Islam, and why this entire effort to bring democracy to the Middle East will ultimately not bear fruit. Well, what are we told in our Declaration of Independence? The Declaration of Independence, I will point out, really was the foundational document for what later became our Constitution. And in it, the most famous paragraph that we all know is the statement that Jefferson made that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the Muslim would not differ with us that men are created by God, but they would deny that all men are created equal. They would deny that these rights are inalienable, and they would deny that they are self-evident. They do not believe in equality. They do not believe, for instance, that everybody should have the right to vote, because different people have different classes within their society. Muslim men are at the top of the food chain, if you will. Women are below that, and non-Muslims are even below them. And therefore, because there are different classes within their society, there is no equality under the law, as we have spelled out in our Constitution within our Bill of Rights. Because there are these differences, there is also no tolerance for differences. As a matter of fact, according to Sharia law, it is forbidden for Islam to be criticized by anybody or anything, any teaching, any book, nothing. And if anything is different from what Sharia law teaches, it is not to be accepted nor tolerated, and those who try to criticize Islam are to be punished and put to death. Because of this, as we can see the events going on right now here in 2014, the month of August, the atrocities being carried out in Syria, Iraq, and other places in Africa, Nigeria, there is no respect for life. People are being wantonly slaughtered, cruelly treated, butchered as though you would butcher an animal, simply because they don't meet the standards that these monsters believe they should meet. As a result, they don't also respect private property, which John Locke, who heavily influenced the founders, and especially Jefferson, in the writing of the Declaration of Independence, they don't respect private property because that is the basis for personal liberty and freedom. Those in the city of Mosul, Iraq, who were Christians, or some of these other minority sects, were told convert or die. They were told they could pay a tax, but they had to flee and leave everything behind. And these barbarians have come in and have just looted and taken over all of their private property, their possessions. No respect for it whatsoever. In Islam, there is no freedom of religion, no freedom of speech. There is no freedom of assembly, especially if you are assembling to worship in a way that is not Sharia compliant, in other words, non-Muslim. And if you have a complaint against them as to how you're being treated, there is no redress. There is no avenue of complaint to the government. They just cut your head off. All of these things, which we take for granted as part of our first Bill of Rights, is non-existent in Islam. And therefore, if there is a crime committed, do you think you have the right to a fair trial? No, not at all. Not if you're not a Muslim. And even if you're a Muslim, you may not be given a fair trial. It just all depends upon the clerics and how they view you and what's been done. And obviously, as we see the atrocities being carried out by these monsters, there is no protection from cruel and unusual punishment, as we are guaranteed in our Constitution. Instead, punishment that they mete out is of the most cruel form in nature. And so when we think about democratizing these countries, how can we bring about something which the very basis that is required is non-existent? For instance, allow me to give you just a few listings of things contained under Sharia law. This is from a book entitled Sharia Law for Non-Muslims, from the Center for the Study of Political Islam, written by Bill Warner, who has written several books that are good that I could recommend to your reading. Another one is The Life of Muhammad, the Sirah, also by Bill Warner of the Center for the Study of Political Islam. They are small books, inexpensive, and if you go to his website, politicalislam.com, you can order these books, and they will give you a very good insight into what we are facing as a country and the danger that Islam poses to us. But under Sharia law, compare this to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. Under Sharia law, he says there is no freedom of religion. We've already talked about that. There is no freedom of speech. You can be put to death for criticizing Islam, and if you dare say anything about their precious prophet Muhammad, they will issue a fatwa against you to have you murdered. There is no freedom of thought. You cannot think anything contrary to Sharia law. There is no freedom of artistic expression, and especially if it is political satire aimed at criticizing Islam or their precious prophet Muhammad. Obviously, then, there can be no freedom of the press. There is no equality of peoples. A non-Muslim, a kafir, if I pronounce that correctly, is never equal to a Muslim. There is no equal protection under Sharia for different classes of people. Justice, he says, is dualistic, with one set of laws for Muslim males and different laws for women and different laws for non-Muslims. Obviously, then, there are no equal rights for women. Women can be beaten. A non-Muslim cannot bear arms, direct contradiction to our Second Amendment. There is no democracy, since democracy means a non-Muslim is equal to a Muslim. So why in the world do we think we can democratize these people? We cannot, and we need to open our eyes and realize that and quit fooling ourselves in this political correctness crap that we hear spewed by our political leaders. Our Constitution, he says, is a man-made document of ignorance that must be submitted to Sharia law, in direct conflict with what the last article, or rather Article 6, not the very last, of our Constitution, which says the Constitution is to be the supreme law of the land. Islam, the Muslims, if they were to get an upper hand, would say no, Sharia law trumps our Constitution. And that is why it is so important that we must pass American laws for American justice here in this United States, and that we emphasize to the courts, to the judges, some of whom have even allowed Sharia law to trump the Constitution in their decisions, that it is our Constitution, our laws, that are supreme, not Sharia law or any other Muslim utterance. It says also non-Muslims are diminis, are third-class citizens. All governments must be ruled by Sharia law, as I just commented. Unlike common law, Sharia is not interpretive, nor can it be changed. And there is no golden rule. Now, do you want to know a little bit of a contrast of just how that comes into play? In her book, 500 Plus Islamic Words You Should Know, Dory O'Brien, who's done an extensive study on Islam, just gives a few comparisons between the Bible, which we are founded as a Christian nation, and the Quran. Here are just some things from the Quran. Compare this to our way of viewing life and rights and liberties. Quran says, kill the disbelievers wherever you find them. Infidels are your sworn enemies. Take neither the Jews nor the Christians for your friends. Those who make war upon Allah have their hands and feet of alternate sides cut off. Fight those who believe not in Allah in the last day. Make war on the infidels who dwell around you. Never be a helper to the disbelievers. Be ruthless to the infidels. Fight the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be severe with them. In the Hadith, another Muslim religious book, it states that no Muslim should be killed for killing an infidel. So if a Muslim murders you, me, or somebody else who's a non-Muslim, they can't be tried for murder. They're free because they have complied with Sharia law. Furthermore, if someone stops believing in Allah, kill him. Yes, there is freedom of thought, there is freedom of speech, there is democracy for you in action, isn't it? No, you see where we cannot make democracies out of societies with that type of a mindset. And that type of a mindset is infiltrating our country. It's infiltrating Europe. There are places in Europe where the enclaves of Muslims are off limits to non-Muslims. The police will not even go into that area. For instance, in Sweden, rape by Muslims is so prevalent that Sweden has forbidden the police from collecting any data in the rape investigation that would point to Islam, because rape is part of Islamic doctrine as applied to non-Muslim women. Is that the type of thinking that lends itself to the American way of life, to American society, to how we view mankind? Not hardly. And yet we have political leaders who talk about this religion of peace. But you see, part of the teaching of Islam is also that in order to gain the upper hand, it is permissible, even taught and expected, that you will lie to the non-believers to lull them into a sense of security, to throw them off guard, and then when you are strong enough, you crush them. That is what we face in the other parts of the world, and that is why it is important that we realize that we're not at war with radical jihadists. This is the teaching of Islam for every Muslim. And why, as we think we can go and make these little Americas out of these Muslim countries, we are sorely mistaken and deluded. And we must stop trying to spend our money and our precious blood in doing so, but instead gear up for the fight of our very survival against this ideology that is as dangerous, if not more so, than those we have fought in times past of Nazism, communism, and the others. Well, not exactly a study of the Constitution as we usually have, but I hope you found this enlightening. I encourage you to study more in it because we're in a fight for our very survival. Until next week, I wish you a pleasant evening. Good night.